In the summer of 1852, a child was found wandering the muddy streets of New Orleans, perfectly healthy, perfectly clean, speaking 3 languages fluently. Yet every family who tried to claim her was turned away by armed men who appeared from nowhere. What happened next would be erased from official records, but the whispers of that truth have survived in the shadows of Louisiana's darkest secret. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time when you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The Mississippi River has always been a keeper of secrets, its murky waters hiding more than just silt and debris beneath its surface. But in the sweltering heat of July 1852, New Orleans was about to discover that some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some children are too dangerous to be loved. The French Quarter was alive with its usual chaos that morning, merchants hawking their wares, sailors stumbling from taverns that never closed, and the constant symphony of a dozen languages mixing in the humid air. It was Marie Thibodeau who first saw her, though she would later wish she hadn't. Marie was opening her bakery on Royal Street when she noticed a small figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, unbothered by the horses and carriages that seemed to instinctively veer around her. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with hair so black it seemed to absorb the morning light, and skin that appeared almost luminescent despite the dirt and grime of the quarter. She wore a simple white dress that should have been filthy but remained pristine, as if the very dust of New Orleans refused to touch her. Marie would later tell her priest that the first thing she noticed were the child's eyes, not their color, which she could never quite recall, but the way they seemed to hold knowledge that no child should possess. "Are you lost, little one?" Marie had asked in French, approaching slowly as one might approach a wild animal. The child tilted her head, a gesture that seemed both innocent and calculating, and responded in perfect Parisian French, "I am exactly where I need to be, Madame Thibodeau." The fact that the child knew her name should have been Marie's first warning, but maternal instinct overtook caution. She reached out to take the girl's hand, intending to bring her inside for food and shelter, while she sent word to the authorities. That's when the first man appeared. He emerged from the shadows between buildings, as if he had been waiting there all along, dressed in a black coat despite the oppressive heat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He said nothing, merely stood between Marie and the child, his hand resting on what appeared to be a pistol at his hip. Marie stumbled backward, her heart racing, but before she could cry out, the man spoke in accented English. "The child is not for you. Walk away." His voice carried a weight that seemed to press against Marie's chest, making it hard to breathe. She found herself backing into her shop, her hands trembling as she closed the door, all thoughts of helping the mysterious child evaporating like morning mist. Word of the strange child spread through the quarter like yellow fever. Within hours, dozens of people had seen her wandering the streets, always alone, yet somehow always protected. She spoke to people in their native tongues, French to the Creoles, Spanish to the traders from Cuba, English to the Americans, and languages that some swore they had never heard before, but understood perfectly in the moment. She knew things she shouldn't know, the names of people's dead relatives, the locations of objects that had been lost for years, secrets that had been carefully buried in the deepest corners of hearts. Thomas Ashford, a wealthy plantation owner who had lost his daughter to scarlet fever 2 years prior, became convinced that this child was his. Elizabeth returned to him. He had been in the city on business when he encountered her near the St. Louis Cathedral. The child had looked at him with such familiarity, had called him Papa in his daughter's exact voice, that he fell to his knees weeping in the street. He tried to embrace her, to lift her into his arms, but again the men appeared, this time 3 of them, moving with an unnatural synchronization that suggested they were not entirely human themselves. "She is not yours to claim," they said in unison, their voices creating an echo that seemed to come from the very stones of the cathedral. Ashford, a man not accustomed to being denied anything, reached for his own weapon, but found his arm frozen in place, his muscles refusing to obey his commands. The child looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been hunger, and whispered, "Elizabeth says the pain will end soon, but not today." Then she walked away, leaving Ashford collapsed on the cathedral steps, sobbing for a daughter who was dead and a child who might be something far worse than an orphan. The authorities, such as they were in 1852 New Orleans, tried to intervene. Police Chief Patrick Malone, a broad-shouldered Irishman who had seen his share of strange happenings in the quarter, personally led a group of officers to collect the child. They found her sitting on the edge of a fountain in Jackson Square, her feet not quite touching the ground, humming a melody that made the hardened officers feel inexplicably homesick for places they had never been. Malone approached with the practiced confidence of a man who had faced down drunken sailors and voodoo practitioners alike. "Now then, little miss," he said gently, "you'll be coming with us. We'll find your people and get you home safe." The child stopped humming and looked at him with eyes that seemed to shift color like oil on water. "My people are already here, Mr. Malone. They've always been here. You've just chosen not to see them." As if summoned by her words, the guardians appeared again, but this time there were 7 of them, forming a perfect circle around the fountain. Malone would later swear in his official report, before it was confiscated and destroyed, that the men cast no shadows despite the bright afternoon sun. One of Malone's officers, a young man named Baptiste, who had grown up in the bayous and knew the old stories, grabbed his superior's arm. "We need to leave, Chief. This is not for us. This is older than the city, older than the church. This is from before." Malone wanted to argue, wanted to assert his authority, but something in the child's smile made his blood run cold. It was the smile of something ancient, wearing the mask of innocence, playing a game whose rules mortals were never meant to understand. They retreated, and Malone would spend the rest of his days jumping at shadows and checking over his shoulder for men in black coats who cast no shadows. As the days passed, the child's presence began to affect the city in increasingly disturbing ways. Animals became agitated, with dogs howling at all hours and cats disappearing entirely from the quarter. The Mississippi itself seemed to react to her proximity, with fishermen reporting that the water would turn black as pitch when she walked along the levee, returning to its normal muddy brown only after she had passed. Birds would fall silent in her presence, and more than one person swore they saw their own reflection in windows age rapidly when she walked by, showing them glimpses of deaths they had not yet died. The religious community was divided in their response. Father Francis at St. Louis Cathedral declared the child a demon and attempted an exorcism from a distance, reading Latin prayers from his balcony as she passed below. The prayers had no effect, except to make the child laugh, a sound like silver bells that nevertheless made the priest's nose bleed. Meanwhile, Marie Laveau, the infamous voodoo queen of New Orleans, proclaimed that the child was something else entirely, not demon nor angel, but something that existed before such distinctions were made. She warned her followers to stay away, marking doors with symbols that might protect them from whatever attention the child might bring. But not everyone heeded the warnings. There were always those who thought they could outsmart the situation, who believed that power, money, or faith would be enough to claim the child for their own purposes. Judge William Rothschild, a man known for his collection of oddities and his belief in the occult, became obsessed with the idea that the child was the key to immortality. He had studied ancient texts, corresponded with mystics across Europe, and believed that children like this one appeared once every century, carrying within them the secrets of life and death. Rothschild attempted to approach the child with a different strategy. Rather than trying to physically claim her, he sought to engage her intellectually, meeting her in Jackson Square with books of ancient philosophy and mathematics. To his amazement and delight, she could discuss Plato in ancient Greek, solve mathematical theorems that had puzzled scholars for decades, and recite passages from texts that Rothschild was certain had been destroyed in the Library of Alexandria. For 3 days, they met and talked, the guardian figures maintaining their silent vigil, but not interfering. On the 4th day, Rothschild made his mistake. Intoxicated by the knowledge she had shared, he asked her directly, "What are you? Where do you come from?" The child's expression shifted, becoming something that was neither young nor old, neither kind nor cruel, but simply other. "I am what remains when the last star burns out and the first star ignites. I am the pause between heartbeats, the space between thoughts. I come from the place where your kind stores the things you're not ready to remember." She reached out and touched Rothschild's forehead with one small finger. The judge screamed, a sound that echoed through the quarter and sent people running for their homes. When they found him hours later, he was alive, but changed. His hair had turned white, his eyes stared at nothing, and he spoke only in languages that no scholar could identify. He would spend the remaining 20 years of his life in an asylum, drawing symbols on the walls with his own blood, symbols that made the doctors feel sick to look at and that seemed to move when no one was watching directly. The situation reached a crisis point when a group of wealthy plantation owners, convinced that the child was either a threat to their power or a tool to enhance it, decided to take matters into their own hands. They hired mercenaries, hard men who had fought in Texas and Mexico, men who didn't believe in superstition and cared only for gold. Armed with rifles and determination, 20 men surrounded the child as she sat on the steps of a shuttered shop on Dauphine Street. The leader, a scarred veteran named Cole, aimed his rifle at the nearest guardian. "Step aside, or we'll go through you," he growled. The guardians did not move, did not speak, simply stood with their hands at their sides. Cole fired, the sound of the shot echoing off the building walls. The bullet passed through the guardian as if he were made of smoke, shattering a window behind him. The guardian remained standing, unchanged, unmoved. The child stood up slowly, her small form seeming to grow larger without actually changing size. "You cannot kill what was never born," she said, her voice carrying, despite its soft tone. "You cannot harm what does not exist in the way you understand existence. But you can die. You are dying right now, with every breath, every heartbeat. I can show you how it ends, if you'd like." She began to walk toward them, and the bravest men in Louisiana, men who had faced death a dozen times, broke and ran. All but Cole, who stood frozen as she approached. She reached up and touched the barrel of his rifle, and the metal began to rust and decay. aging decades in seconds. The wood rotted, turning to dust that fell through his fingers. She looked up at him with those impossible eyes and whispered something that no one else could hear. Cole dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his scarred face, and when his men found him later, he had taken holy orders and would speak of nothing but redemption and the terrible mercy of things beyond human understanding. As July turned to August, the city's attempts to deal with the child became increasingly desperate and disorganized. The mayor called emergency sessions that devolved into shouting matches between those who wanted to drive the child out by force and those who feared what might happen if they tried. The economy began to suffer as sailors refused to dock at a port where unnatural things walked the streets, and traders took their business to Mobile or Savannah rather than risk encountering the child and her silent guardians. It was during this time of chaos that the child began to speak of why she had come. She would tell different people different things, but the message was always fundamentally the same. Something was coming, something that required preparation, and she was here to identify those who would play a role in events that would unfold not in their lifetimes, but in the lifetimes of their descendants. She spoke of a great change, a transformation of the world that would begin in Louisiana and spread like ripples on water. She marked certain people with nothing more than a look, and these people reported dreams of impossible cities and technologies that wouldn't be invented for another century. Among those she marked was a young slave named Samuel, who worked in the household of a prominent banker. The child appeared in the banker's garden one evening, her guardians nowhere to be seen, for the first time since her arrival. She spoke to Samuel in a language he didn't recognize, but understood perfectly, telling him that his great-great-granddaughter would help to break chains that were stronger than iron, chains that bound not bodies, but minds. She touched his hand, and where her fingers made contact, a mark appeared, not quite a scar, not quite a birthmark, but something that seemed to exist just beneath the skin. That mark would appear on one child in each generation of Samuel's descendants, always on the left hand, always in the same place. The child also visited the convent of the Ursuline sisters, appearing in their chapel during evening prayers. The nuns were terrified at first, but Mother Superior Marguerite, an elderly woman who had seen much in her 70 years, approached the child with calm dignity. If you are a test from God, we accept. If you are something else, we still must show compassion, for that is our calling. The child smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face into something almost human. Your God and my origin are not so different, Mother Marguerite. Both exist in the spaces between what is known and what is feared. Your faith will be needed, not for salvation, but for preservation. Remember this moment, write it down, hide it where only the worthy will find it. Mother Marguerite would indeed write down the encounter, encoding it in a journal that would be discovered over a century later during renovations of the convent. The journal contained not only her account of the child, but also detailed instructions for a ritual that modern scholars believe might be related to quantum entanglement, though expressed in the religious language of the 19th century. The journal disappeared shortly after its discovery, but not before copies were made and distributed to various secret archives around the world. As August drew to a close, the child's behavior began to change. She started to visit specific locations around the city, spending hours standing in places that seemed completely unremarkable. A corner of a warehouse, a patch of ground near the river, the middle of an intersection in the Garden District. At each location, she would stand perfectly still, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or calculation. The guardians would form increasingly complex patterns around her, their positions corresponding to no known geometric or occult configuration. Those who observed these rituals reported strange phenomena. Time seemed to flow differently near the child during these moments, with some witnesses swearing that they saw the sun move backwards in the sky, or that they aged years, in minutes, while watching. Others claimed to hear voices speaking from beneath the ground, voices that spoke in languages that predated human speech. A few reported seeing glimpses of other places, other times, superimposed over the familiar streets of New Orleans, like a double exposure in a photograph. The local photographer, Jules Beaumont, attempted to capture an image of the child during one of these rituals. He set up his camera at a safe distance, prepared his plates with the utmost care, and waited for the perfect moment. When he developed the plate later, he found that where the child should have been, there was only a column of light that seemed to extend infinitely upward and downward. But around that column, in the shadows and margins of the photograph, were faces, hundreds of faces of people who had never been born or had died long ago, all looking toward the light with expressions of terrible longing. It was on the night of August 31st that everything changed. The child announced, through various messengers she had touched with her knowledge, that she would be leaving at dawn, and that those who wished to understand should gather at Congo Square. The authorities tried to prevent the gathering, fearing riot or worse, but found that their orders were ignored or forgotten. As the night wore on, hundreds of people made their way to the square, rich and poor, free and slave, believer and skeptic, all drawn by a compulsion they couldn't quite name. The child stood in the center of the square, her guardians forming 3 concentric circles around her. She began to speak, and everyone heard her words in their own language, in their own understanding. She spoke of time as a river with many tributaries, of choices that created worlds and destroyed them, of a future where humanity would face a trial that would determine whether it joined the greater community of conscious beings or faded into the background noise of the universe. She spoke of New Orleans as a crossroads, not just of cultures but of possibilities, a place where the veil between worlds was thin enough for messages to pass through. "I came to plant seeds," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the square. "Seeds of memory, seeds of possibility, seeds of change. Some of you carry them now, though you won't know it for years, perhaps generations. When the time comes, when the sky opens and the old barriers fall, these seeds will bloom. Your descendants will remember this night, even if they never hear of it. They will dream of a child who could not be claimed because she belonged to all and none." As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, the child began to fade, not disappear, but fade, like a memory becoming less distinct or a dream upon waking. The guardians faded with her, their dark forms becoming transparent, then translucent, then gone. But before she vanished entirely, she spoke one last time, and these words were remembered differently by everyone who heard them. Some swore she said, "The choice has always been yours." Others heard, "We will return when you're ready." Still others claimed she said nothing at all, that there was only the sound of wind through spaces that shouldn't exist. When the sun fully rose, Congo Square was empty, except for the confused crowd. The authorities arrived to find no evidence of disturbance, no sign that anything unusual had occurred. But in the dirt of the square, there were patterns, complex mathematical patterns that hurt to look at directly. City workers were ordered to rake them away, but the patterns reappeared each morning for 7 days, before finally fading for good. Photographs of these patterns would later be classified by the United States government and locked away in archives that officially don't exist. In the weeks that followed, New Orleans tried to return to normal. The official story, such as it was, claimed that mass hysteria had gripped the city, possibly due to contaminated grain or swamp gas. The few official documents that mentioned the child were quietly destroyed or relocated to private collections. The Church conducted its own investigation, but sealed the results in the Vatican's secret archives. Even Marie Laveau, who had built her reputation on the mysterious and supernatural, refused to speak of the child except to say, "Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed." But the effects of the child's visit rippled through the city in ways both subtle and profound. Those who had been marked by her gaze found their lives taking unexpected turns. Some became inventors, creating devices decades ahead of their time. Others became artists, painting or writing works that seemed to predict future events with uncanny accuracy. A surprising number became involved in the early civil rights movement, as if driven by a vision of equality that transcended the prejudices of their time. Samuel, the slave who had been touched by the child, gained his freedom under mysterious circumstances when his owner suddenly decided to manumit all of his slaves and liquidate his holdings. Samuel moved north and established a school for freed slaves, teaching not just reading and writing, but also mathematics and philosophy. His students would go on to become leaders in their communities, and the mark on his hand would indeed pass to one child in each generation, always accompanied by unusual intelligence and an inexplicable ability to see patterns that others missed. Thomas Ashford, the plantation owner, who had believed the child was his daughter, sold his plantation and devoted his remaining years to establishing orphanages throughout Louisiana. He never spoke of the child again, but those who worked closely with him noted that he would sometimes pause in the middle of a conversation, touch his chest where his heart was, and whisper, "The pain will end soon, but not today." He died peacefully in his sleep exactly 2 years after the child's disappearance, and his last words were reportedly, "Elizabeth says it's time." Judge Rothschild remained in the asylum, his mind broken, but somehow expanded. The symbols he drew were eventually recognized by a visiting mathematician as representing concepts that wouldn't be formally discovered until the development of quantum mechanics. His writings, when they could be translated, seemed to describe technologies and scientific principles that wouldn't be understood for another century. The asylum, which burned down in 1891 under mysterious circumstances, was said to be haunted by voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. The photographer Jules Beaumont became obsessed with capturing impossible images. He developed new techniques that shouldn't have worked with the technology of the time, creating photographs that showed multiple moments simultaneously or revealed things that weren't visible to the naked eye. His work was dismissed as trickery during his lifetime, but modern analysis of his surviving plates has revealed anomalies that cannot be explained by any known photographic process of the 1850s. Several of his photographs are now held in private collections, deemed too disturbing or inexplicable for public display. The patterns that appeared in Congo Square, though officially destroyed, were remembered by those who had seen them. Years later, a young mathematician named Pierre Delacroix, whose grandmother had been present that night, would dream of these patterns and wake to frantically scribe equations that would contribute to early theories of parallel universes. He claimed that the patterns were not just mathematical, but were somehow alive, that they represented a form of consciousness that existed in pure mathematical form. The city itself seemed changed by the child's presence. Sensitive individuals reported that certain locations around New Orleans had become thin places, where the boundary between this world and others was permeable. These locations, which corresponded to where the child had performed her standing rituals, became focal points for unusual phenomena. Electronic devices would malfunction near them, animals would behave strangely, and people would occasionally report seeing glimpses of other versions of New Orleans, sometimes more advanced, sometimes in ruins, sometimes populated by beings that were almost, but not quite, human. In 1878, during a yellow fever epidemic that devastated the city, several witnesses reported seeing the child again, or perhaps her echo. She appeared at the bedsides of the dying, not to heal, but to whisper something that brought peace to those in their final moments. Medical workers reported that patients who claimed to have seen her died with expressions of profound understanding rather than fear. One doctor, maintaining his scientific skepticism to the end, documented that these patients showed unusual brain activity in their final moments, patterns that suggested not the shutdown of consciousness, but its transformation into something else. The stories of the child were passed down through families, though rarely spoken of openly. They became part of the hidden history of New Orleans, the stories told in whispers, the memories that survived in dreams and unexplained knowledge. Children would sometimes be born knowing things they shouldn't know, and their families would remember the stories of the child who couldn't be claimed and wonder if this was the blooming of one of her seeds. In 1925, a secret society calling itself the Guardians of the Pattern was discovered to have been operating in New Orleans since the 1850s. Their stated purpose was to preserve the memory of the child and to prepare for her return. They had collected accounts, artifacts, and what they claimed were fragments of the Guardian's clothing, cloth that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The society was disbanded by federal authorities for reasons that were never made public, and its members scattered, but rumors persisted that they had simply gone deeper underground. During World War II, the United States military established a classified research facility in Louisiana, ostensibly for weapons development. However, documents released decades later under the Freedom of Information Act, though heavily redacted, suggest that the facility was actually studying the locations where the child had performed her rituals. References to temporal anomalies and non-Euclidean geometries appear throughout the documents, along with mentions of test subjects experiencing prophetic episodes after exposure to these locations. In 1962, a young girl named Isabella Thibodeau, great-great-granddaughter of Marie, who had first seen the child, reported having dreams of the child visiting her. She described conversations about mathematics and physics that she couldn't possibly understand at her age. Her parents, remembering the family stories, took her to a psychologist who documented her knowledge of advanced concepts in quantum mechanics and cosmology. Isabella would go on to become a renowned physicist, her work on parallel universe theory earning her international recognition. She always credited her insights to dreams of a strange child who spoke of time as a garden with many paths. The hurricane of 1965 that devastated parts of Louisiana revealed something extraordinary. In the aftermath, as workers cleared debris from one of the locations where the child had performed her rituals, they discovered that the ground beneath had been transformed. The soil had crystallized into complex geometric patterns that extended deep into the earth. Geologists couldn't explain the formation, which seemed to violate known laws of mineralogy. The crystals were removed and studied, but they degraded rapidly when taken from their original location, turning to ordinary sand within hours. In the 1970s, a folk singer named Marcus Cole, descendant of the mercenary who had confronted the child, wrote a ballad about the events of 1852. The song, which he claimed came to him complete in a dream, contained lyrics that seemed to predict specific events that would occur over the following decades. The song was never commercially released, but bootleg recordings circulated among collectors of the esoteric. Those who heard it reported experiencing vivid dreams of the child and her guardians, dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. The advent of computer technology brought new attempts to understand the patterns the child had left behind. In 1985, a programmer named David Rothschild, descendant of the judge who had gone mad, input his ancestors' drawings into a computer system. The resulting analysis revealed that the symbols represented a form of mathematics that incorporated consciousness as a fundamental variable. His work, though dismissed by mainstream academia, influenced early research into artificial intelligence and quantum computing. As New Orleans rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, construction workers at several sites reported finding unusual artifacts, small objects that seemed to be made of a material that didn't match any known element or compound. These objects, which appeared at the exact locations where the child had stood during her rituals, emitted a faint energy that could be detected but not identified. They were quickly confiscated by federal authorities, but not before several workers reported experiencing visions of possible futures for the city, some beautiful, some terrifying, all feeling equally real. In 2010, a doctoral student researching Louisiana folklore discovered a hidden archive in the basement of an abandoned building in the French Quarter. The archive contained hundreds of accounts of the child's visit, written in dozens of languages, some in codes that took years to decipher. Among the documents was what appeared to be a message from the child herself, though how it could have been written was unclear. The message spoke of a coming convergence, a point at which the seeds she had planted would need to bloom, when humanity would face a choice that would echo across all possible timelines. Modern investigations into the events of 1852 have revealed an intricate web of connections. Descendants of those marked by the child have disproportionately contributed to advances in science, civil rights, art, and philosophy. Statistical analysis shows that these contributions cluster around specific themes: the nature of consciousness, the structure of space-time, the possibility of non-human intelligence, and the potential for human transformation. It's as if the child planted not just seeds, but a program, a set of instructions playing out across generations. Paranormal investigators using modern equipment have detected persistent anomalies at the sites of the child's rituals. Electromagnetic readings spike without cause. Temperature fluctuations occur in patterns that match mathematical constants, and sensitive individuals report feeling presences that register on no instrument but are undeniably real to those who experience them. Some investigators have reported seeing the guardians, still maintaining their vigil, visible only in peripheral vision or in the static of electronic displays. In 2015, a team of physicists studying quantum entanglement noticed that experiments conducted in New Orleans showed subtle but consistent variations from those conducted elsewhere. The variations suggested that space-time in the city had been somehow altered, made more flexible or permeable. One physicist, speaking off the record, suggested that the child might have been preparing the city to serve as a bridge between dimensions, a place where contact with other forms of consciousness would be possible when humanity was ready. The year 2020 brought new revelations when the pandemic emptied the streets of New Orleans. In the silence, many residents reported hearing whispers in languages they didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Several people claimed to have seen the child again, standing in the empty French Quarter, her guardians maintaining their eternal watch. She appeared older, they said, or perhaps it was that she appeared less constrained by the appearance of age. She spoke to no one, but stood at each of her ritual sites for exactly 1 hour, as if checking or maintaining something invisible to human eyes. A secret document, leaked from an unnamed government agency in 2021, referenced Project Chilled Nun, apparently an ongoing investigation into the events of 1852 and their continuing effects. The document suggested that the patterns the child created were not static, but were evolving, growing more complex with each passing year. It mentioned concerns about a convergence point projected to occur within the next few decades, when the patterns would reach a critical complexity that might trigger an undefined event. Religious scholars have noted that accounts of the child share elements with appearances of mysterious children throughout history: the green children of Woolpit, the children of Laragub, the prophetic child of Prague. Some suggest that these are all manifestations of the same phenomenon, a recurring attempt by something beyond human understanding to communicate with or prepare humanity for some future event. The fact that these children cannot be claimed, cannot be possessed or controlled, seems to be a crucial element of their nature. Psychologists studying the descendants of those touched by the child have documented what they call inherited memory, knowledge and experiences that seem to pass from generation to generation outside of normal genetic or cultural transmission. These individuals often report dreams of the child, dreams that provide insights or warnings that prove uncannily accurate. Some have suggested that the child created a kind of psychic network, linking certain bloodlines across time and space. In recent years, artificial intelligence researchers have noticed something strange. When AI systems are trained on data sets that include accounts of the child's visit, they begin to produce outputs that shouldn't be possible, given their programming. They generate mathematical proofs for problems that haven't been posed, create art that depicts events that haven't yet occurred, and sometimes refuse to process certain requests with error messages that read like warnings. One AI system, before being shut down, repeatedly output the message: "The child returns when the last program runs and the first consciousness awakens." Environmental scientists studying Louisiana's wetlands have discovered that the locations of the child's rituals correspond to points of unusual ecological stability. While surrounding areas suffer from erosion and degradation, these sites remain unchanged, as if protected by some force that transcends normal environmental factors. Water samples from these areas show properties that shouldn't exist, molecules arranged in patterns that suggest information storage at a quantum level. The children of New Orleans, those born after the child's visit but carrying the inherited memory of her presence, often display unusual abilities. They solve problems by intuition rather than logic, create art that seems to depict other worlds with photographic accuracy, and sometimes speak of the child as if she were a playmate only they can see. Child psychologists have documented hundreds of cases, noting that these children seem to be preparing for something, though none can articulate what that something might be. As our technology advances, we discover new layers to the mystery the child left behind. Quantum computers analyzing the patterns from Congo Square have revealed that they encode information about the fundamental structure of reality, information that our science is only beginning to understand. Some researchers believe that the child was teaching us, leaving us textbooks written in the language of reality itself, waiting for us to develop the ability to read them. The guardians, those silent figures who protected the child from being claimed, remain one of the deepest mysteries. Witnesses consistently described them as human in shape, but wrong in some fundamental way, as if they were the idea of humans rather than humans themselves. Modern theorists suggest they might have been projections, three-dimensional shadows of beings that exist in higher dimensions, sent to ensure that the child's mission was not interfered with by those who would use her for their own ends. There are some who believe that the child never truly left, that she simply shifted into a state of existence that our senses cannot normally perceive. They point to the continuing anomalies, the persistent effects of her visit, the way that sensitive individuals still report encounters with her. Perhaps she walks among us still, visible only to those who carry her seeds, continuing her work of preparation for whatever is to come. The economic impact of the child's visit, though never officially acknowledged, has been profound. New Orleans became a center for innovation in fields that didn't exist in 1852: quantum computing, consciousness research, interdimensional mathematics. Companies drawn by rumors of the anomalies have established research facilities, pouring billions into understanding the changes the child wrought. The city that she chose as her point of contact has become, in many ways, humanity's laboratory for understanding the impossible. Cultural anthropologists have documented how the story of the child has influenced art, literature, and music emerging from New Orleans. The themes appear again and again: transformation, hidden knowledge, the thin boundaries between worlds. Jazz itself, with its improvisational nature and ability to express the inexpressible, is sometimes credited as an attempt to recreate the music the child hummed, that melody that made people homesick for places that don't exist. In 2023, seismic equipment detected regular pulses emanating from beneath New Orleans, pulses that match no known geological phenomenon. The pulses occur at intervals that correspond to prime numbers, suggesting an artificial origin. Some researchers believe that the child planted something deep beneath the city, a device or entity that has been slowly awakening over the past century and a half. Others suggest that the pulses are signals, messages being sent to or from somewhere else, using the entire city as a transmission array. The Vatican, breaking its long silence on the matter, recently acknowledged that it possesses documents related to the child's visit. Though the full contents remain sealed, leaked portions suggest that the Church considers the child to be neither divine nor demonic, but something outside their theological framework, a messenger from a state of existence that predates the division between sacred and profane. The documents reportedly contain instructions for a ritual that must be performed if and when the child returns, though the nature and purpose of this ritual remain unknown. Modern witchcraft practitioners in New Orleans, inheritors of Marie Laveau's traditions, speak of the child as a fact of existence like gravity or time. They say she represents the universe's immune system, appearing when reality itself is threatened, or when consciousness reaches a crucial evolutionary point. Their rituals often include references to the child, not as an entity to be summoned or worshipped, but as a force to be acknowledged and prepared for. The medical community has documented an unusual phenomenon among those who claim descent from witnesses of the child's visit. Their brain scans show atypical neural patterns, particularly in areas associated with temporal perception and quantum cognition. Some neuroscientists theorize that exposure to the child created epigenetic changes that have been passed down through generations, literally rewiring human consciousness in subtle but significant ways. These individuals often report experiencing time non-linearly, remembering events before they occur, or feeling the presence of alternate versions of themselves. In 2024, a joint task force of historians, physicists, and intelligence analysts released a carefully sanitized report suggesting that the child's visit was not unique to New Orleans, but part of a global phenomenon that occurred simultaneously in 1852. Similar entities appeared in Tibet, the Amazon rainforest, the Australian outback, and beneath the ice of Antarctica. Each child spoke to their witnesses of seeds and preparation. Each left patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Each was protected by guardians who cast no shadows. The report suggests these appearances were coordinated, perhaps different faces of the same hyperdimensional entity interacting with our three-dimensional world. The street artists of New Orleans have become unwitting prophets, their murals depicting scenes that later come to pass with disturbing accuracy. One artist, claiming to be guided by dreams of the child, painted a massive mural in 2019 showing the city surrounded by walls of light, with figures that looked human but weren't quite right standing guard. 3 years later, witnesses reported seeing exactly such figures during an unexplained aurora borealis that appeared over Louisiana, a phenomenon that should be impossible at that latitude. There are whispers in certain circles that several world governments have been preparing for the child's return, or rather, for what her return might herald. Underground facilities have been constructed at the precise coordinates where she performed her rituals, equipped with technology designed to measure and possibly communicate with non-human intelligence. The scientists working in these facilities report equipment malfunctions that seem purposeful, as if something is testing their instruments, learning about human technology from the inside out. The descendants of Samuel, the slave marked by the child, have formed an informal network spanning continents. Each generation, the one who bears the mark, experiences visions of increasing clarity and urgency. The current bearer, a quantum physicist named Dr. Sarah Harrison, has published papers suggesting that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is instead a fundamental force that the brain learns to channel. Her work, inspired by childhood dreams of the child, proposes that humanity is on the verge of a phase transition in consciousness, similar to water becoming steam. Local hospitals have reported that babies born at the exact moments corresponding to the times when the child stood at her ritual sites show remarkable characteristics. These children, now scattered across the world, display capabilities that seem to violate our understanding of human development. They learn languages instantly, solve mathematical problems without conscious calculation, and sometimes seem to communicate with each other across vast distances without any technological aid. Psychologists studying these children have noted that they all share a peculiar trait. They refuse to be alone with mirrors, claiming they can see the others watching from the other side. The fishing communities along the Mississippi have their own stories about the child. They speak of nights when the river runs backwards, when fish swim in perfect spirals, when the water itself seems to whisper in the language the child spoke. On these nights, they say, you can see her standing on the water, not walking on it, but standing as if the river itself has become solid beneath her feet. The guardians are there too, they claim, but different, more visible, more real, as if they're finally becoming what they always were meant to be. A tech entrepreneur, inspired by family stories of the child's visit, has invested billions in developing what he calls consciousness interface technology. His company's research has discovered that the locations of the child's rituals emit a unique form of radiation that affects quantum computers in predictable ways. By placing quantum processors at these sites, They've achieved computational results that shouldn't be possible, solving problems that would take traditional computers millions of years. He believes the child left us the blueprint for technology that operates on principles we're only beginning to understand. In the basement of a demolished building in the French Quarter, urban explorers discovered a room that shouldn't exist, according to any architectural plans. The room's walls were covered in writing in the child's hand, though how this was possible remained unexplained. The writing described events that had occurred since 1852 with perfect accuracy, and events yet to come with terrifying specificity. Before the authorities could properly document the discovery, the room simply ceased to exist, leaving only solid earth where it had been. Those who entered the room reported experiencing memories that weren't their own, living entire lifetimes in the moments they spent inside. The Catholic Church's secret archives contain testimonies from priests who claim to have encountered the child in their dreams, always with the same message. The choice between fear and wonder determines the shape of what comes next. These priests often reported miraculous healings or prophetic visions following these dreams, but also a sense of cosmic vertigo, an awareness of how small and how vast human existence simultaneously is. Several left the priesthood, not from loss of faith, but from gaining a faith that could no longer be contained within traditional religious structures. Marine biologists studying the Gulf of Mexico have discovered that certain deep-sea creatures migrate to specific coordinates that correspond with the child's ritual sites, gathering in patterns that match the geometries she traced in Congo Square. These gatherings occur with clockwork regularity, and the creatures involved span species that normally never interact. During these gatherings, the water itself seems to change, becoming something between liquid and solid, something that instruments cannot properly measure, but that drives human observers to tears with its impossible beauty. The musicians of New Orleans speak of the ghost frequency, a note that appears in recordings made at the sites where the child stood, but which no instrument actually played. This frequency, when isolated and analyzed, contains patterns of information that seem to describe the fundamental structure of reality in musical form. Some musicians have attempted to build entire compositions around this ghost frequency, but listeners report that the music makes them feel as if they're falling upward, as if gravity has reversed, but only for their consciousness. In 2025, as we approach the anniversary of another August in New Orleans, the signs of change are accelerating. The aurora borealis has appeared over Louisiana 3 times in the past year, each time accompanied by sightings of the guardians. Electronics fail in increasingly complex patterns that spell out messages in binary code. Children around the world are drawing pictures of a girl in a white dress, though none have heard the stories of 1852. The patterns in Congo Square, thought destroyed, have begun reappearing, not just in the dirt, but in cloud formations, in the arrangement of fallen leaves, in the frost on windows, on the rare cold Louisiana morning. Scientists studying these phenomena have reached a disturbing conclusion. The events of 1852 were not a visitation, but a preparation. The child was not a messenger, but a gardener, planting seeds that would grow into something beyond human comprehension. The mutations in consciousness, the alterations in space-time, the networks of marked individuals, all of this has been building toward something that our science calls a singularity, but which might be better described as a birth. The term "the child no one was allowed to claim" has taken on new meaning among researchers. It wasn't that people weren't allowed to claim her as their own. It was that she was preparing to claim us, not as possessions, but as participants in something larger than our species has ever imagined. The guardians were not keeping us from her, but keeping us for her, ensuring that humanity would reach the necessary point of development when the seeds she planted finally bloomed. Recent declassified documents from multiple intelligence agencies reveal a shared concern. The patterns the child created are not passive, but active, not recordings, but programs. They're rewriting reality at a quantum level, introducing variables into the equations of existence that shouldn't be there. Some scientists believe we're experiencing the early stages of what they call a consciousness cascade, where human awareness will suddenly expand to perceive dimensions and entities that have always been there, but which our brains couldn't previously process. The dreams are spreading. People with no connection to New Orleans, no knowledge of the child's visit, are dreaming of a girl in white who speaks in languages that predate speech. She tells them to prepare, to choose wonder over fear, to remember that consciousness is older than matter and will outlast it. Psychologists have documented thousands of these cases, noting that the dreamers often wake with knowledge they didn't have before: equations, blueprints, musical compositions, all describing aspects of a reality that doesn't quite match our own. There are those who say the child has already returned, that she walks among us unrecognized, no longer needing guardians, because we have become the guardians, protecting her work without knowing it. They point to the increasing synchronicities, the way that seemingly unconnected events align to push humanity toward greater consciousness, greater connection, greater awareness of the impossible. Every scientific breakthrough that reveals the universe to be stranger than we imagined, every moment of human consciousness that transcends the material, every child born with abilities we can't explain, all of this is her return, not as an individual, but as a force of transformation. The economic and political powers that have long controlled human destiny are finding their influence waning in the face of these changes. The children marked by her influence cannot be controlled by traditional means. They see through lies, resist manipulation, and seem to operate according to principles that transcend profit and power. They're building new structures, new ways of organizing human society that account for consciousness as a fundamental force rather than an accidental byproduct of brain chemistry. Environmental scientists have noted that the ritual sites have become what they call reality anchors, points where the normal laws of entropy seem to reverse. While the world around them degrades, these sites become more complex, more organized, more alive. Some theorize that the child was creating not just patterns, but seeds of a new kind of existence, one that feeds on consciousness rather than consuming resources, one that grows more complex and beautiful rather than declining into chaos. The artists continue their unconscious prophecy, their works depicting scenes of transformation that feel both alien and inevitable. Paintings show New Orleans not destroyed, but transformed, its buildings becoming crystalline structures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its people walking through walls that are solid and permeable at once, its sky filled with entities that are neither angels nor aliens, but something that encompasses and transcends both concepts. There are accounts, increasing in frequency, of people simply vanishing at the ritual sites, not missing, not dead, but translated into something else. Witnesses describe seeing them become transparent, then luminous, then something that human eyes can't quite process, before they're gone. The authorities have cordoned off these areas, but people are still drawn to them, especially those who carry the mark of the child's touch in their bloodlines. They speak of hearing her calling, not with words, but with a pull that feels like homesickness for a home they've never seen. The musicians who have incorporated the ghost frequency into their compositions report that their audiences are changing. People leave the performances altered, speaking of seeing colors that don't exist, of understanding mathematics they never studied, of remembering lives they never lived. The music seems to activate something dormant in human consciousness, something the child planted that has been waiting for the right frequency to germinate. As our story draws toward its impossible conclusion, we must confront the reality that the child who visited New Orleans in 1852 was not an ending, but a beginning. Every person who tried to claim her, every guardian who protected her, every witness who remembered her, all were part of a story that transcends individual human existence. The seeds she planted were not just in the people she touched, but in the fabric of reality itself, waiting for the moment when human consciousness would be ready to bloom into something unrecognizable and magnificent. The children born at the ritual sites, now adults, have begun to gather. They speak of a calling, a knowledge that the time of preparation is ending and the time of transformation is beginning. They describe visions of the child, not as she was, but as she is. A being of pure consciousness, wearing form like clothing, moving through dimensions like we move through rooms. She is coming, they say, but not from somewhere else. She is emerging from where she has always been, in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the moment between sleeping and waking. The government facilities built at the ritual sites have recorded unprecedented activity. Energy readings that shouldn't be possible, gravitational anomalies that suggest the presence of massive objects that aren't there, temporal distortions that show time flowing in multiple directions simultaneously. The scientists working there have begun to exhibit the same symptoms as Judge Rothschild, not madness, but an expansion of consciousness that human language cannot adequately describe. They draw equations in the air that only they can see, speak to colleagues who aren't present in this dimension, and smile with the terrible knowledge of those who have seen behind the veil of reality. The Mississippi River, that ancient keeper of secrets, has begun to behave in ways that defy explanation. It flows uphill at certain points, its waters becoming luminous at night. Fish swimming in formations that match the patterns from Congo Square. Those who drink from the river at the ritual sites report visions of the past and future existing simultaneously, of seeing every possible version of themselves, making every possible choice. The river, some say, is remembering what the child taught it, preparing to serve as a conduit for something that will transform not just New Orleans, but the entire world. The story reaches beyond Louisiana now, beyond America, beyond Earth itself. Radio telescopes have detected signals from deep space that match the patterns the child left behind. The signals come from every direction at once, as if the entire universe is singing in the language she taught us. Scientists debate what this means, but those touched by her influence already know. We are not alone, have never been alone, and the child was preparing us for the moment when we would be ready to join something larger than we ever imagined possible. In the final analysis, the child no one was allowed to claim was never about the child at all. It was about us, about humanity, about consciousness itself preparing for its next evolutionary leap. Every person who encountered her, every descendant who carries her mark, every dreamer who sees her in their sleep, all are part of a vast pattern that began in 1852, but extends forward and backward through time, connecting every conscious being that has ever existed or ever will exist. Subscribe to Sinister Past if you want to hear more untold stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about history, reality, and the very nature of existence itself. Some truths are too strange for history books, too dangerous for official records, but they survive in the shadows, waiting for those brave enough to listen. The child taught us that the greatest mysteries aren't solved, but experienced. Not understood, but lived. And in the end, perhaps that's the most sinister truth of all, that the past isn't past, the future isn't future, and somewhere in New Orleans, in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, a child in a white dress is still standing, still waiting, still preparing us for a transformation we cannot imagine, but cannot escape.